Welcome to Career and Leadership Real Talk, the no-nonsense guide for ambitious managers who want to have more impact and progress their career. I'm Pamela Langan, a job search coach and expert CV writer specialising in helping frustrated professionals land the jobs and pay rises they know they deserve.
And I'm Jackie Jagger, a leadership and mindset coach specialising in helping newly promoted and new to role leaders to avoid the dickhead trap and lead with confidence. Between us, we've helped hundreds of leaders and managers to find new roles, take ownership of their careers, and handle the challenges that job searches and leadership responsibility inevitably bring. And now we're joining forces to share with you what we know has worked for our clients.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. Today we are talking about how to make the most of induction meetings, because this is something that we talk to a lot of people about. So from my perspective, I'm helping people find new jobs. So obviously inductions are going to be part of that first 90 days. And Jackie is working with leaders on the leadership launchpad, and they're moving into new roles. They could be promotions, they can be internal and external. So there's a lot to think about when it comes to induction meetings, because they are so much more than just getting to know people and finding out, what people do outside of work and how many kids they've got and things like that. There's a way to have induction meetings that means that you can get under the skin of how to really manage and work with those people rather than just trying to get to know people. And sometimes people can make that mistake of going into those meetings thinking this is an opportunity to get to know this person rather than find out how this person ticks and how I can work best with this person, how I can manage this person, how I can lead this person. What are your thoughts on it?
I completely agree. One of the things that I see with my clients, and I'm sure it's similar for you, is that inductions are typically, on average, not that well delivered. So when somebody goes into a new role, there's very often very little expectation of who should you meet with, when should you meet with them by, what needs to be covered. So you're left to figure it out for yourself. And I think particularly this is the case where I see where people are promoted and they're in a new role in the same organisation, and it's assumed that they'll just morph into that new role and they don't really need much of an induction. And the reality is that induction meetings can be such a critical part of setting yourself up for success in a new role, whether that is a sideways move, whether that is an internal move, whether that is finding it a new organisation. So that's why I think for both of us, we recognise that in our own work, we see the value of those conversations, and we wanted to bring that to the fore with what we'll cover today.
Yeah, because I think it's so important, regardless of where you're at in your career, making the most of those induction meetings can save you so much time later on. And if you can set up those meetings with the right people, so thinking about who are your key stakeholders and how will they impact your career moving forward. It's about thinking about that longer term goal, isn't it? Who is going to help you progress in the future, and how can you start building a relationship with them now? How can you understand business from their perspective? And I think it's really important as well for role clarity. One of the things that I always found, particularly when I was doing induction meetings myself, is understanding my role from someone else's perspective. Like, how do you think I fit in, or my role fits in to this organization? How do you see my role impacting your role? What are your views around my role and the things that my team deliver? Just asking those questions to understand, because you'll get given a job description, you'll get given objectives, you'll go into that role. But will you make as big an impact as you could if you don't understand how your team, department, your role, and all of that other good stuff is perceived by the wider business and those key stakeholders?
Yeah, for me, there's two real key priorities when you are having a series of induction meetings. So one is clarity, and you've identified the importance of clarity around your role, but there's also clarity around company culture and systems, that kind of getting a feel for how do things work around here. how are things different from my previous role or organization? And there's also that element of really getting clarity on things like those objectives, on what do you need to deliver and who are going to be those key relationships. And then that's the other side of it, is that the purpose is really about starting to establish your professional network from early doors. And we talked before we started recording where so many people tend to go into an induction phase and make a mistake of going one of two ways. So either they're really desperate to be liked and they use those induction meetings for the relationship side, but miss the clarity, or they sometimes want to go in and make their mark and make an impression, and that can damage some of the relationship side and not always even achieve the clarity in that instance, but where it can create an impression of them that is not necessarily going to set them up for success within the role and or the organization. So I think being really clear on why are you having these induction meetings, what's the point of them, and having those two aspects of clarity and relationship building straight away starts to establish who might you want to meet with, who might you want to meet with sooner rather than later, how might you want to structure some of those conversations, and how can you make sure that you are structuring those in such a way that, like you say, you are building relationships, you are building rapport, but you're not just trying to be friendly, you're hitting that marker of getting the clarity and getting the understanding alongside it.
Yeah, and I think that really does help as well, because seeing how your role is perceived, and it's not about you at this point because you're new in the role. It's about how your role's being perceived in the past, and that could even then be about your team and all the rest of it. But it is about you understanding that, because then you will be able to make more impact naturally, understanding how other people think about your team, perceive your team or your role. And that will really help you to decide what you prioritize and how you do things going forward. And it feeds into so many other things as well. But I suppose one of the key things with induction meetings is that overwhelm and overload, isn't it? Because you're going in there and you want to understand all of this information, you want to get to know the people, and it can feel a little bit like information overload, can't it? And it's like managing that, isn't it? So you want to take in everything, and you end up, if you're anything like me, with like tons and tons of notes and tons of reflections afterwards and everything. So it's like, how do you stop that overwhelm and that overload and really figure out which are the key parts or the key elements that you need to know about?
And that happens so often where people do feel that. And what I always say to clients is, but you're in that first phase, you can ask more questions and or you can take away, reflect, and go back with more questions at a later date. You will find in induction meetings, almost inevitably, that people will forget when you have a conversation with them the context that you lack, or they won't realize that you lack some of the context. So they're talking from their perspective. They'll be using jargon and phrases and terminology. I remember when I went into an engineering business and there was so many acronyms and so much jargon, and it felt in the first couple of weeks that I would never understand what was going on. And I class myself as someone who does pick things up pretty quickly. I do tend to learn quickly and I do tend to ask a lot of questions. But it's very easy in that early phase for there to be a whole load of stuff thrown at you by people that just haven't thought about. You don't have their understanding or their context. And so it feels like they're speaking a foreign language. So completely agree with that idea of take lots of notes, ask lots of questions, be honest if you don't understand, because you are new, you're not supposed to understand everything. And very often if you say to somebody, okay, can I just back up there and ask a different question? Or can you just give me a bit of an overview of what this means? Or can you explain what that terminology means? People will be, oh, so sorry. Yeah, of course. And they're quite happy to do that and to provide that clarification. So I think often it's that perception where you feel like you should know it all. And on a logical level, there's no way you could know it all at that point.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key things, isn't it? Like just being open to not know everything. Some of the situations that I've been in the past where I've worked in different organizations, managing different projects, and some organizations will, for example, use Prince 2, and you'll go to another organization who will say they use Prince 2, but actually it's the interpretation of it. So I would always be like, okay, just explain to me how this works. Now, obviously, that is what I was trained in. So I should know that project life cycle. I should know exactly what part comes next. But if different companies are doing it in different ways, then it's always super important to know, okay, yeah, right, got that experience, I've got that knowledge, but I just need you to tell me how you do it, how you use it. And I suppose that's the same for systems and things like that as well. Because there can be that real pressure, can't there, to be like, they think I can do this. They think this is my experience. And then I'm going to go in and I might have to learn some new things. I might have to understand how they do it. But that's okay, because they have given you that job because they think you've got the potential, not because you tick every single box. And I think that's the key thing, isn't it? Because there's real temptation. You've got to make that strong first impression, that you've got to show them that you know everything, that you've got all of the information and all of the knowledge. But actually, they might use those systems and work through processes in different ways. So you need to understand the way that they do things. So it's about being open, isn't it? And saying, okay, so yeah, this is what you do. Show me, I'm 5 years old, how you do this. And I think when you know, it's easier to do that, isn't it? It's easier to say, explain it to me, become a child, so that I understand exactly how these processes work in your organization. Because while I've got the experience elsewhere, they might not use it in the same way.
Yeah. So should we move on then to our kind of 5 strategies for success then? So that we will give that clarity on, okay, this is how we would suggest approaching your induction meetings. So the first one is to come prepared and leave with a plan. So by this, what we mean is do your homework before you go to each meeting. So think about who you're meeting and have some relevant questions. And we talked again before we started recording about that importance of balance between not being passive, especially when you're going into a management or leadership role. I think people will sometimes go into an induction meeting, especially if they've been predetermined and set up, where they don't go prepared with questions and they're almost putting the ball in the other person's court. And then the other person is sat there wondering, what do you want to know? Or will use their own agenda, which might be absolutely nothing to do with what's most useful for you to learn or understand from them at that particular point in your induction. So I think that preparation is absolutely key, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think preparation, and then also summarizing the key takeaways, because sometimes you can interpret information differently. So by summarizing, even if it's a quick email that says, thanks for your time today, these are some of the key takeaways, and it could be some options and next steps that you can include in that as well. And you're just starting that communication and building that knowledge. And it's good then to refer back to that information in the future as well, because by the time you've met everybody that you need to introduce yourself to, then you'll need some notes to refer back to.
And that helps to reduce that feeling of overwhelm, because if you take a bit of time and reflect after each meeting and follow up and send that, then you both help to cement what you've taken away from the meeting. And like you say, you're then starting that relationship or starting to build that relationship by being seen as somebody who follows up, who has shown that you've taken key things from that conversation. And that, as an individual, if somebody has met with me as part of an induction and they send me that simple email with thanks very much for your time, here are the key things that I've taken away, or here are the key actions that I've agreed, then I feel that I trust that person's credibility, because it feels, oh, great, that's somebody who is actually going to follow up and get things done. So that, I think, creates a simple thing, but it helps you as an individual to manage that sense of overwhelm and simplify it down to key steps, and also helps to manage expectation and build the relationship, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And then I think that also, and it leads on to number 2, which is building your own induction plan if you need to. Don't leave it to chance. Don't let someone else dictate that for you, or give you something that isn't very well thought out for your role. Like, you don't know who is creating that plan for you. So if you build your own induction plan and you figure out who you need to meet with, and you can start asking yourself the questions, or you can start asking people that you know within the organization already, like, who are the main stakeholders I'll be working with. Obviously, you can ask this to your line manager, but it's also good to ask the people that you're working with too. Are there any cross-functional teams or departments that I should connect with? And who are the go-to people in our area? And you'll always find when you ask those questions, I always think that when you ask those questions to different people, you'll always get different answers, because different people will have different go-to people. And that just widens up your network and people that you can go to help you make more of an impact in your role. And then also thinking about, who do you go today for questions, or to get answers to your questions or support? And that could be your line manager, but 9 times out of 10, your line manager isn't the person that's responsible for your development. You need to take ownership of your development within that role. And your line manager is generally the person that is there managing the people, making sure everybody's got what they need, but they're not necessarily always the right person to give you the support in order to help you grow within your role.
And that point that you made about who's the go-to person, what I notice with that one is very often when people ask that question, the go-to people are the people that have been there longer. They're the people who are subject matter experts. They're the people who are not necessarily a senior. And if you have had an induction plan prepared and given to you, when your boss has prepared that, they may not have thought about some of those things and who might answer some of those questions about specific things, because they're operating at a different level. And I used to put a lot of effort into making sure that when people joined my team, that they had the right degree of induction and it was well planned. But I never thought of everybody that they needed to meet with. I never got it 100% right, because it always came about during that phase of, oh, yeah, actually, that person would be really useful for you to go and meet with. So I think when you start to ask those questions well, you're taking ownership of making sure that your induction delivers what you need in order for you to deliver in your role, and you're getting ahead of the game rather than relying on being spoon-fed.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing as well, where you say around they're operating from a different level. They're also operating from their perspective, and they're looking at, who are my go-tos rather than who are your go-tos. So I think that's really key to build on the plan that they give you as well. Great if they give it to you. That's really kind of them. A lot of the time, people aren't really given much of a plan to get started with. And sometimes people are given something so detailed that it just feels quite overwhelming. So I think you have to make that judgment call on it. So you can go, right, okay, what have I got? What's in this? And actually, who is important? And you don't have to figure it all out on the first day or in the first week or whatever. You can do it as you go, because the more people you speak to, the more people you're going to find are important to your role. And then you can then set up meetings with them. You can still be having induction meetings like a couple of months in, once you've figured out who is relevant to your role, who's a good person to speak to, and who can help you make the most impact. It's not just about getting all of this done in the first 2 weeks, is it?
Absolutely not. It definitely does go on. I had a session with a client last week who was 6 weeks into their new role and very much had that whirlwind, had lots of things that had already come to the fore and all of that stuff. Then in that coaching session, was able for them to have that time to think and reflect and then think about the next phase. So absolutely, it will evolve and it will shift. You will never be able to plan the perfect induction before or on day one. It will always be something that you'll have some good structure to it, and then you will build and have something for other bits to hang on.
Yeah, definitely. And then I think number 3 is going to be around asking useful questions as well, and not being afraid to speak up. Because I think sometimes in a new role, we can really go in on the back foot. Like, even though we know when we think about it logically, we have a right to be there, we've been selected, they've chosen us, we are the right person for that role. Sometimes, depending on the situation, we can sometimes be afraid to speak up and ask the question. I think sometimes it's because we don't want to feel stupid. I know I've been guilty of that in the past. If I'm a senior leader, then I should know this information, or I should have a good idea about what is going on. But it's about moving away from that, isn't it? And really removing that fear factor and just thinking, okay, I'm going to ask these questions because I need to focus on understanding this role, rather than worrying about how I might come across or what people might think, because this is not about you being liked by these people. This is, as you say, it's about building the respect, isn't it? And the only way you're going to build respect is to understand your role and make an impact within that role.
And useful questions in this context can be things like, how do decisions tend to get made here? What is the process typically for communicating? How often does the business strategy get reviewed and communicated? Those types of things, when you're going into a leadership role, there's not necessarily one specific person that you need to go to get answers, but they're very often things that will have a real bearing on how you might navigate your role successfully, but nobody thinks to tell you them. So you have to, therefore, things like, what's the budgeting cycle? When do budgets get set, and how does it happen for budgets to be pulled together? So many times I've known of people who've gone into a leadership role, and then all of a sudden, at some random point within the first few months, somebody, oh yeah, can you put your budget together for such and such? And they've got zero context for how is that done here? What are the expectations when it is? What's the sign-off process? Do I build it from last year's budget? Do I build it from a future strategy and propose and have to bid from part? So it's asking those kinds of useful questions where you can anticipate what are some of the things I'm going to have to do in my role over the first 12 months. Things like, how does performance get rewarded? You know, how do high performers, how does talent and succession get treated here? Is there a formal succession process? Is there a formal talent management process, or is it more informal? Those kinds of questions will really build your understanding and awareness and help you to shape your approach beyond just the day-to-day of your everyday role. And those things are so important, context, that you don't get blindsided by them because you need them and you haven't asked the question.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I suppose that links in nicely with number 4, which is building relationships, not just knowledge, because you can use those meetings as networking opportunities. And by showing genuine interest in your colleagues' roles and experiences, asking those useful questions, that is going to mean that you then increase your knowledge, that you get to know them better. And, you know, the better that you get to know those people, then they're going to help with your future success. They're going to help you when it's time for you to progress, or depending on what you're working with and how they link in with your role. Then, you know, there's so many useful connections, you for me, through asking those useful questions, isn't there? And building relationship within those organizations.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to the relationship side, those types of things, you can ask, again, really simple questions that give people the opportunity to tell you things, not on a personal level, but more so from a career perspective of, how long have you been in this role? How long have you been in this business? What's your background prior? What are the things that you are really passionate about in terms of your subject area? And when you ask those questions, you give people the opportunity to tell you a bit more about themselves in a way that doesn't feel intrusive or personal because it's work focused and career focused. But you also start to build a brilliant understanding. We've talked about using those types of questions with your own team, but induction meetings are a great opportunity to ask those types of questions more broadly with other people from the organisation. And it helps to really shape and understand why might somebody act or operate the way that they do. So if I give an example of a situation I've been in before where somebody had grown up within that business, they were in quite a specialist role, but they'd never experienced any other business. And there was some frustration between my team's interactions with their team, and that made a lot of sense of it because they didn't have that external context. They didn't necessarily understand how those things might work cross team in other organizations. So it helped to give some of that understanding and awareness, but equally it helped then to shape how might I influence and how might I work well with someone that's from that particular background.
Yeah, and I think that is, again, that is like a really good point, isn't it? Because it's about thinking through what you need to know, what's going to be useful, and really using these meetings as an opportunity to get yourself embedded within the organization and gain the knowledge that you need. And really, it's an opportunity, isn't it, for you to get to know them, but for them to get to know you as well. And then I think when you go into these meetings, you do need to then come out and use the information that you've got to create an action plan, which is our number 5, isn't it? Because you go into these meetings and it's nice having a lovely chat and questions and getting all of your answers and everything. But then it is about what you do with that information that counts. And what I tend to do is take loads of notes, and then I'll also reflect and follow up with different questions. But then what I'm also then doing is thinking, okay, where does this fit in? Does this fit in to my 30-day plan, my 60-day plan, my 90-day plan? Because ultimately you want to use those meetings that you want to build relationships, you want to make a great impression, but you also want to make as much impact as you can do in the first 90 days.
I think when you do that and have those conversations and then pull that back into your overarching plan and kind of review, does this plan need to change? Are there things that I'm finding out that are perhaps more of a priority or need to be more of a priority? So the plan will evolve during that initial phase. And it, again, allows you to take ownership of those conversations with your boss, with other people about what your key deliverables will be. And one of the things that people often find most helpful when we're working together on a leadership launchpad is having quite structured reflection questions that are adapted for each different phase. So questions to ask yourself before your day 1, questions to ask yourself at the end of your first month, second month, and so on. And we share those as resources with the members in our career club, because actually, even without working with a coach, just asking yourself some of those questions and reshaping your 90-day plan just really helps you to keep focused on what is it that you are there to achieve in this role, what is it that you want to get to over the first 12 months and beyond that, and therefore what needs to happen in the shorter to mid-term. So you identify what relationships need to be deepened, what relationships might need some investment, but also you might identify that actually there's some things that perhaps feel less of a priority than you might otherwise have thought, because from having those conversations, meeting, either other things come out and become more of a priority, or you recognize that what felt like a priority for you is not shared or is not mutually considered a priority by other people within the business.
Yeah, I think that's where career clubs quite helpful with that as well, because obviously we've got the resources and we've got and that includes the induction checklist and things like that, and the reflection questions. But I think sometimes as well, when you're in those leadership roles, it can feel quite lonely, can't it? And you're in that new phase that you haven't really got any friends, or you don't really know who you can trust. And you'll have different conversations and different things will come up. And sometimes you might hit a brick wall, you might need to throw some ideas about. And I think that's where Career Club is really useful, because you can come into the group and you can ask those questions, you can do a download, you can get advice from us and the other members around that. And you can even post anonymously if you don't want to post as yourselves. And Jackie works with people in the first 90 days, helping them to make the most of it. And those induction meetings are a huge part of it. And getting that right and positioning yourself really lays that foundation, doesn't it, for the success that you have in that role.
It absolutely does. So hope that has been helpful for those of you that are in or are going into new roles. If the Career Club could be helpful for you, then do get in touch and we can send you the link. And if you know of someone who is going into a new role, then please do share this episode with them, because we know a lot of what we've covered will be things that potentially don't always occur to people. So thanks as ever for listening, and we'll be back again with another episode next week.
Exciting news from us. If you're an ambitious leader or manager earning 50k or more and you're ready to take your career to the next level, we have an opportunity for you. Introducing Catalyst Career Club, your secret weapon for unlocking career success. As a member, you'll get access to monthly live training sessions, exclusive job opportunities, and the ability to get personalised advice from us on your toughest career challenges.
We've helped thousands of driven leaders like you secure significant pay rises, land dream roles and thrive in their careers. And now we want to support you in achieving your most ambitious career goals too. Membership is just $6.99 per month with no contract or tie-in. And as a special bonus for being our podcast listeners, you can use the code podcast at checkout to get your first month for just £1. Head over to pamelalangan.com/Catalyst Career Club to sign up now, and we'll see you inside.